We just have to talk about Matt Gaetz. It's incredible to hear what he says about people who he truly feels are inferior to him. And by the way, a guy like Matt Gaetz, look, I'm Latino, and this podcast, the Rick Sanchez News podcast, this is a Latino perspective, right? And we got this figured out. We know who this guy is. We've known, trust me, if you listen to me, if you grew up in the United States as a Latino, you've known a lot of Matt Gaetz's, okay? Yeah, we know exactly who this guy is. That's why this comment that he makes here that you're about to hear about women who simply have a different opinion than him, this does not surprise us. Dale.
Why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions? Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb. These people are odious on the inside and out. They're like 5'2", 350 pounds.
5'2", 350 pounds, you're ugly. You're inferior to me. If you're not as good looking as I am, you're inferior to me. If you don't have as much money as I have, you're inferior to me. If you're a Latino, for example, which I think Matt Gaetz is the kind of guy who would not use the word Latino. He would say spick, okay? I guarantee you that that's exactly the word that would come out of Matt Gaetz's mouth when describing someone like me. Just like he describes somebody who disagrees with him, a woman who he doesn't find attractive, a fat, 350-pound thumb-looking person who is odious. And think about this, right? Think about this. Simply because they have a different opinion than he does. By the way, I understand that there are different opinions when it comes to abortions and the abortion issue. I'm Catholic. I grew up Catholic. I've had to deal with this kind of thing. But because you disagree with someone, man, that does not give you the right to insult them. That does not give you the right to call them names. Unless, of course, you're the kind of person who grew up in such a way that you think you can get away with this. And that is who Matt Gaetz is. You see, from the Latino perspective, we're a little bit different because most of us didn't grow up with rich daddies who are powerful enough to get us out of trouble whenever we got in trouble. No, we go to jail or we get our ass kicked by our dad or worse, by our moms. And that's why we get guys like Matt Gaetz. And when I'm looking at this guy and I'm seeing him saying the things that he says and the things that he does, especially considering his history, especially considering what we already know about him, we got him figured out, man. And by the way, this is not the kind of guy who, if you were to ask him, hey, do you feel bad about what you said? Did you just lose it? Because I've said a lot of stupid shit in my life. Trust me, I am much more imperfect than anybody out there. I've made as many mistakes as Matt Gaetz has made, I'm sure. But if I insulted somebody as harshly as he just did, or maybe I got caught up in the moment because I was hearing my applause and I said something which was just horribly mean like he just did, and then somebody would come to me and say, you offended a lot of people, I would respond with something like, I'm sorry. It got away from me. I maybe shouldn't have said that. That's me. And by the way, that's most of us who are Latinos in the United States because, we were brought up differently. Our moms and dads have taught us not to do these types of things. In fact, when I said a little while ago, I feared my mom more than my dad, I did. I did. I would fear the repercussions that I would get from my mom if I went out there and I said that all ugly women were just fat pigs or were 350 pounds and looked like thumbs and they had no right to even talk about abortions or have an opinions on abortion because they're too fat to have an opinion, which is essentially, by the way, what Matt Gaetz is saying. And yes, we would apologize. I would apologize. I sometimes feel like I've spent a life apologizing. That's why I've been married for 32 years to the same woman. But you know what? Matt Gaetz got an opportunity, as he should, to answer the question as to whether he really felt bad or maybe made a mistake by using the verbiage that he did. And here's how he responded.
Is it safe to say that based off of your comments, you're suggesting that these women at these abortion rallies are ugly and overweight?
Yes.
What do you say to people who think that those comments are offensive?
Be offended.
Isn't that amazing? I don't care. Be offended. You don't matter. You see, when you're fat, you don't matter. If you're overweight, you don't matter. If you're a little ugly, you don't matter. Whatever his opinion of ugly is, of course. And by the way, that enthymime does not stop there. In Matt Gaetz's thinking, in this guy's thinking, if you're black, you don't matter. Puerto Rican, don't matter. You know, Latino of any other kind, Mexican, don't matter. Right? That's Muslim, you don't matter. Arab American, you don't matter. I mean, this is Matt Gaetz. That is what Matt Gaetz represents. That is what's so obvious there. And I got to tell you, from a Latino perspective, that's what we see. We know these guys. We know these guys. A guy like me, I grew up in a barrio with my buddies. Yeah, we did stupid things once in a while, but we had no privilege. We had nothing to go back. We knew that if our teacher caught us doing something, or if the local cop caught us doing something, which from time to time happened, we expected we were going to pay for it. He's never had to pay for anything. Read about Matt Gaetz. Read where he comes from. Read about who his father is. He comes from privilege, comes from money. His dad's one of the most powerful people in Central Florida, and this guy's been in problems with the law. He's had all kinds of issues in his life, and he's never given a shit because daddy got him out of it. And that's who you're seeing right there. When he said, yeah, they're ugly, I don't care, they're offended. It's not nice to call people names. I don't care. Tough shit. That's essentially what Matt Gaetz is saying. By the way, when Matt Gaetz, because I know now he ran for office and he probably hired a PR team, and you know, he probably has a stylist and all these things, and he gets himself all coiffed before he goes in front of the camera. You know, this guy has an alcohol problem, proven, and because of that alcohol problem, he's had some bouts with his own weight problems. You want to see it? Here it is. Take a look at this. Yeah, that's Matt Gaetz. I don't know. I think maybe he looks a little bit like a thumb to me. How about to you? What do you think? Is that what a thumb looks like? Because he's going around saying women are ugly. They all look like thumbs because I'm so pretty. Look at me. Hey, show that again, Antonio. Show that again. Pónmelo otra vez. There it is. There's Matt Gaetz. Look at that guy. That's the guy who says women are ugly. That's the guy who says they look like thumbs. Especially women who disagree with me on a very important issue that a lot of Americans have a right to debate. I get that. They have a right to debate this. But to say those, to use his words, odious words when describing fellow human beings, fellow Americans, man, that's just wrong. It's just wrong, and we know it's wrong. And by the way, this is getting interesting now, because within the Republican Party, there seems to be, have you seen this lately? I mean, have you seen what's going on? There seems to be a shift that I didn't see coming toward Mike Pence. Former Vice President Mike Pence is taking on former President Trump. And in so doing, he has been giving speeches and talking about how the party needs to realign, that maybe we need to be a little more respectful. And you know what? Say what you want about Mike Pence, but I think he's right. Both sides. I mean, we need to become more earnest. I think our discourse needs to become more respectful. But Gaetz hates Mike Pence and is going around saying some pretty nasty things about him. In fact, here's Gaetz on Pence.
Let me just say what everybody here knows. Mike Pence will never be president. Nice guy, not a leader.
Yeah, so Gaetz is going after Pence. I mean, he's going after Pence full speed. And this is not the only comment where he's going around doing that. And there seems to be almost a consortium. Now, Pence, for the most part, has been keeping his mouth shut. The worst thing that Mike Pence has said is, I couldn't do what President Trump asked me to do because it was wrong, it was illegal, it was unconstitutional. That's what he said. Since he said that, he has been the target of a lot of Republicans, especially the Republicans who are loyal to former President Trump. Among those is Gaetz. I mean, Gaetz is, in one breath, he's talking about all women who disagree with me on abortion are fat pigs. And in the next breath, he's saying that, Mike Pence is a joke and should not be even considered for the presidency of the United States. Now, okay, you might say, and you have a right to say this, you might say, you know what? That's his opinion, Sanchez. Gaetz has his opinion to go out there and criticize, quote unquote, fat women. He can do that. This is America. You have a right to do that. You have a right to criticize Mike Pence and say whatever you want to say about Mike Pence, and he has a right to do that as well. But there's a problem. Matt Gaetz has a problem. You know he has a problem. I know he has a problem. And this is a serious problem, And his problem was just brought out recently during a cable interview where Mark Short, who, by the way, works for Mike Pence, has been an assistant and an advisor to Mike Pence, was asked about the comments that Gaetz made referring to women. And then he was asked about the comment that he made referring to Mike Pence. Now, there's a rule that we all know, right? You grow up knowing this, or you learn it later on through Hard Knocks, or you learn it in business. When you're vulnerable, shut up, right? When you're vulnerable, shut up. When you know you're going to give your opponent an opening, shut up, right? This is not the moment for you to be going around saying things about women in general. Forget Pence. You should not go around talking about women, whether they're fat or skinny or short or blue-haired or red-haired or Latina or African-American or whatever. Women is not a topic that you should be even discussing, Matt Gaetz. And this is why. Look what happens when somebody is asked on television the very next day after Gaetz's comments what they thought of Gaetz's comments.
Well, I don't know if Mike Pence will run for president in 2024, but I don't think Matt Gaetz will have an impact on that. In fact, I'd be surprised if he was still voting. It's more likely he'll be in prison for child sex trafficking by 2024. And I'm actually surprised that Florida law enforcement still allows him to speak to teenage conferences like that. So I'm not too worried about Matt Gaetz. Thanks.
That's an amazing comment. Think about what he just said. I'm surprised that Florida law enforcement, the FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, would allow Matt Gaetz to go and speak to people under the age of 18, which apparently that gathering had a lot of youngsters there, including young girls, right? Young women. I imagine there were some young ladies there who were 17 years old. And why is that important? Because when Mark Short says Matt Gaetz is probably going to be in prison by 2024, he may not be too far from the truth. He may be 100% correct, sir. Right? And here's why. Matt Gaetz is presently being investigated. His best buddy, his wingman, as he's called. That's what he's called, the wingman. These guys were buds, man. They grew up, both of their daddies are rich, and they grew up in Central Florida, and they both went into politics because they figured that's a great job for lazy people who don't have to do shit, right? Daddy will get you a gig in politics, and then you just go around talking to people. And besides, you're privileged, you're important. It doesn't matter whatever the hell you do. So his one friend, this guy, Joel Greenberg, he's in prison now. And you know what he's in prison for? He's admitted that he's a sex trafficker because he was young, had nothing to do, had lots of daddy's money, had a position of privilege as a tax man for Central Florida in the city of Orlando. And he took it upon himself to just go have fun, right? And that's fine. Listen, when you're young and you want to hang out and you want to, quote unquote, carouse with the ladies, that's fine. But if you're doing it in such a way that it's public and you're a public figure, which he was, and so is Matt Gaetz, now you're bringing potential problems to yourself. And you know what? Here's what's worse. What if you're doing this and the young ladies that you're finding trolling the internet happen to be underage, like let's say 17 years of age, Matt Gaetz is being investigated for doing just that right now. And you know who apparently is going to be the witness against him? His bud, his wingman, his good friend Joel Greenberg, as you know. That's right. So Joel Greenberg is apparently spilling the beans to law enforcement. We're all wondering why it's taken so long for the Department of Justice or for perhaps prosecutors in Central Florida to come out and say, look, we got the goods on him. Because it certainly looks, by all accounts, like they've got the goods on him. Information, according to, Greenberg, that he apparently, by the way, talk about stupid, Gaetz. Yeah, you who goes around telling everybody what their faults are. According to several reports, he wrote a check for $900 through Venmo. I guess that's not a check then. Pardon me. I'm not a Venmo guy. He apparently used Venmo to send $900, let me correct myself, to his wingman, his friend Greenberg, to his hit-up. His hit-up. His hit-up, according to some prosecutors, according to reports that we have read, are a 17-year-old girl, or is a 17-year-old girl. So his buddy would get him young girls, Greenberg. Greenberg has already admitted he was doing this. Now prosecutors are saying, well, everywhere you went, you were with your best friend, Matt Gaetz. Was he involved in this too? And he's saying, yes, he was. And now they have found this one Venmo receipt that he sent for $900 to be with a hit-up. And apparently they've traced it to a 17-year-old girl, so say some reports. Again, he has not been charged, just being investigated, to be fair. But at least according to the reports, he also, that 17-year-old girl, crossed the line from Florida, and that too is illegal. You cannot, according to law, take a minor and cross state lines, because that is what's called sex trafficking. If you take someone from one state to another with a promise that you're going to pay them or do something for them, and worse, they happen to be 17 years of age, you've got some serious problems. You've got some serious problems that you're going to have to contend with. And that's the situation that he finds himself out. And by the way, everybody knows this. And that's the other thing. That's the other thing. And here's what I happen to think is so different from us, right? First of all, before we get into that explanation, and this is the Latino thing too, as a Latino young man growing up, when I screwed up, and even now as an adult, if I do something that shames me, shames my name, or shames my family, for me, it's really, really, really important to feel that shame. We have a word for it in Spanish. I don't know if you know it. Those of you who are Latino will know it's called vergüenza. That's our word, vergüenza. Tener vergüenza. It's shame. It means when somebody catches you doing something untoward, you don't go out there and show your face. You don't go out there. No, you know what? You lie low, right? Is it lay or lie? You lie low, because you're embarrassed. You've shamed yourself. You've shamed your family. This is how we're brought up. Guys like this, they don't give a crap. He's been getting away with this shit his whole life because he's rich and he's privileged. But you know what? That's why this one moment that you're about to hear, and for those of you watching us on YouTube, that you're about to see, I think is so poignant. This is Matt Gaetz telling what I always tell my kids is your comeuppance. This is Matt Gaetz getting his comeuppance. Let's take a listen.
Are you a pedophile? 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 Are you a pedophile, Congressman Gaetz? Are you a pedophile? Congressman, are you a pedophile?
Well, you know what? It's not a bad question. If you're a grown-ass man and you're being accused and people are saying and reports are filed and they know that you're under investigation and your best friend, your buddy, your wingman, right, in this case, is already on record saying he's going to spill the beans on you and he's in prison as a pedophile, then there's a real good chance that at least, right, people have a right to ask you if you too are a pedophile. Did you take a 17-year-old girl across state lines? Did you pay $900 to have sex with that 17-year-old girl? Those are good questions, because if the answer is yes, you're a pedophile, right? You're a pedophile. And that's why this story is so important. It's important because it says so much about us. It says so much about where we are. It says so much about who Matt Gaetz is. And in the end, I keep going back to that word that we're all taught as little boys and little girls. If you grow up Latino, vergüenza. Hay que tener vergüenza. You have to be able to have and understand what shame is. That's how we're raised. That's what we're taught. When I watched Bill Clinton get caught doing what he did with Monica Lewinsky, as a Latino, the first word that came to me was vergüenza, shame. Why would you do that? Why would you do that in the Oval Office, Mr. President? I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. When I heard 18 women come forward and accuse Donald Trump of sexual offenses, including rape, and he would just say that they were ugly, there's no way he would have touched them, because after all, they look so ugly. I thought, vergüenza, shame. I mean, I'm sorry, but if somebody accused me of something like that, I would disappear. I would just go away. I couldn't face the cameras. I know there's times when people accuse people of doing things that they haven't done. But if that's the truth, then I'd go in front of every single camera in America and I'd say, let's talk about this. Let's talk about, you're accusing me of this. I'll stand on the highest mountain and deal with every question and do every interview and hold a news conference every single day until I put it to bed, because I know it didn't happen. But if you're not doing that, but you're going around and you're talking about other things like abortion and calling everybody who disagrees with you a fat pig, which is essentially what he says, and then you're going around as well and talking about other politicians like Mike Pence, which he's allowed to have an opinion on, but really? Look, you don't get to talk about anything until you deal with this 17-year-old. You don't get to talk about anything until you've answered every single question about sleeping with a 17-year-old, because you're a grown-ass man. And grown-ass men don't sleep with 17-year-olds or even have stories written about them that say they're investigated for this. And if those stories are written, you better deal with it. You better deal with it. As far as I can tell, he ain't dealing with it. That's what he isn't showing. In a word, vergüenza. We call it the Rick Sanchez News Podcast, and we're so glad you're there. You can find this podcast on Spotify. You can find it on Apple. You can find it wherever you get your podcast. And we're gonna give you a perspective on the same stories that you see on CNN or NBC or everywhere else, except we're gonna give you the Latino perspective, because you're not gonna see a Latino perspective on NBC or CNN or Fox or anywhere else, because it doesn't exist. And that's why we're doing this. By the way, if you're watching us on YouTube, you see that thing down there that says subscribe? Por favor, do it. Ándale.
Agua.